This week's gospel reading raises a very sensitive topic, one that's also very controversial today and was very controversial in Jesus' time. Now, the Torah clearly permits divorce as outlined in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. And we're going to look at this passage a little more carefully in a moment. But generally speaking, the passage asserts that if a man marries a wife and then she does not find favor in his eyes because he finds something unclean or maybe objectionable is a better word to use here, he may give her a bill of divorce and send her out of his house. Now, Jesus wasn't the only Jew trying to work out the implications and meaning of this passage. The Hebrew Bible's acceptable grounds for divorce seems to be that the husband has found something objectionable in his wife. But what qualifies as objectionable? Now, the Mishnah describes famous rabbinic schools of thought from Jesus' time, the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai, debating and disagreeing about what constitutes acceptable grounds for divorce. Marriage is at least two things, right? It is both an ontological truth in its living out of the ideal of creation, but it's also a social fact, right? Full of this worldly challenges and accidents, personalities, affection, and the things that might arise between a couple in the real world. The school of Shammai, I think, approaches marriage in its ontological sense, such that adultery is the profound break in the essence of marriage that not only permits divorce, but in Jewish law requires it. Adultery means that whatever this thing is, it is no longer a marriage. Now, on the other hand, the school of Hillel seems to approach marriage in its social sense, focusing on the actual relationship between the couple. It's really not a question of a stricter or more lenient approach, but it's about where one puts one's focus, on the essence or on the manifestation of marriage. And this brings us to Jesus and the gospel reading for this Sunday. Jesus is, I believe, addressing the ideal, the meaning, the plan for marriage. And we see this in what is, I think, the most shocking part of this gospel reading. Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. Now, this is particularly fascinating because in the Jewish practice of this time, and some would even argue today, a man is permitted multiple wives. While relations for a married woman with another man who is not her husband is absolutely considered adultery in Judaism, relations for a married man with another woman, unmarried woman, not his wife, is not, that was not, and is not considered adultery according to Jewish law. Jesus' argument here about adultery is not a legal one. It's also not a social one. It is entirely an ideal one, focused on the ideal of marriage, the plan of marriage as one flesh. Deuteronomy 24, however, is not a vision of the essence or the ideal of marriage at all. It is entirely practical, social, legal. What if? What if things don't work as they're supposed to? What are the procedures? How do we protect vulnerable parties? What are the restrictions? Jesus is not, in my eyes, making a change to the law of Moses here. He is, like the school of Shammai, placing emphasis on the meaning, on the essence, on the ideal of marriage. This perspective of Shammai and Jesus are crucial for guiding, for orienting us, both Jews and Christians, through the complex, lived social realities of marriages that do not always manifest the ideal and that require attention to the practical, to the social, and to the legal answers to what if.